My sons brought the contract to my birthday dinner and slid it across the table like it was just another plate of food. Daniel didn't even look at me when he said it. Mom, you don't need the salon anymore. It's time to sell and enjoy your life. Kevin nodded beside him, already uncapping a pen like the decision had been made weeks ago. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, the same hands that had shaped acrylic nails for over 30 years, the same hands that had paid for everything they now called theirs. The candles on my cake were still lit, the frosting slightly melted under the kitchen lights, and for a moment I just watched the flame flicker instead of answering. I had turned 68 that night, and all I wanted was a quiet dinner. Maybe a call from an old friend, maybe a memory of how far I had come, but instead I got a contract, a price tag on the one thing that had carried us through everything, Linda's Nails, a small shop in a tired strip mall between a donut place and a coin laundry. Daniel leaned back in his chair and smiled like he was explaining something simple. Mom, that place is outdated. You could get at least $400,000 for it. Maybe more if we move fast, Kevin added. We already talked to a buyer. Really good offer. You don't even have to worry about anything. We'll handle it. I noticed the word we. Not you. Not us. Just we. Like I was already outside of whatever future they were planning. I reached for my water glass, took a slow sip, and set it back down carefully. The condensation left a ring on the table. I watched it spread like something quiet and irreversible. You already talked to a buyer? I asked, my voice calm, almost soft. Daniel shrugged. Just exploring options, Mom. We're trying to help you. You've worked enough. It's time to retire. Retire. The word sat strangely in the room, like it didn't belong to me. I thought about the salon, the hum of the pedicure chairs, the smell of acetone and lotion, the way the morning light hit the front window at exactly 10 o'clock. I thought about the years I spent standing 10, sometimes 12 hours a day, saving every dollar, sending them to school, paying for their cars, their apartments, their weddings. Kevin tapped the paper. Just sign here, Mom. We'll take care of the rest. I didn't move. Instead, I looked at both of them, really looked this time. Their pressed shirts, their watches, the confidence in their posture, and something else underneath, something tight and urgent, like they needed this to happen. Not later, but now. Daniel laughed lightly, trying to keep the mood easy. Besides, that place already paid for everything we needed anyway. The sentence landed harder than anything else that night. I didn't react. I didn't let my face change, but inside something shifted. They knew the salon had supported them once, but they had no idea it still was. No idea how many bills still traced back to that small register. No idea how many times I had quietly filled in the gaps when their lives didn't quite add up. I folded my hands again, smoothed the edge of the contract without reading it, and gave a small nod. Let me think about it, I said. Daniel relaxed immediately. Kevin smiled. Like the hardest part was over, they went back to talking about numbers, timelines, plans that didn't include me, and I sat there, listening. The candles finally burned down to nothing, the room growing a little dimmer, and for the first time that night, I understood exactly what they thought I was, and more importantly, I understood exactly what they didn't know. I did not sign the contract that night, but I did not refuse it either. I simply placed it back on the table and watched my sons gather their things like the evening had gone exactly as planned. Daniel hugged me quickly, his cologne sharp and unfamiliar. Kevin told me to think about it and not to worry because they would take care of everything. They left before the dishes were cleared, before the cake was cut, before I could say anything that mattered. The house grew quiet again, the kind of quiet that settles into the walls. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the sink full of plates. Then I turned off the light and walked into the living room, the contract still in my hand. I did not open it, not yet. Instead, I sat down in the same chair where I had balanced my checkbook for decades, the same chair where I had written tuition checks, car payments, insurance bills. I placed the paper on my lap and closed my eyes, and just for a moment, I was 27 again. Stepping off a plane with one suitcase and $300 in my purse. I did not know the language, I did not know the streets, but I knew I had to work. I cleaned motel rooms in the morning, I washed dishes in the afternoon, and at night I sat in a small Classroom learning how to shape nails, how to hold a file steady, how to smile even when my feet hurt. It took years before I could open my own place, a narrow shop with 4 chairs and a flickering sign. I remember the first day I turned the key in the door. The smell of fresh paint, the hum of the air conditioner that barely worked. I remember thinking this was enough. This would carry me, and it did, slowly, quietly, day after day. The salon paid for everything. It paid for Daniel's college tuition when he said he wanted to study business. It paid for Kevin's first car when he promised he would take care of it. It paid for their rent when they said they were just getting started. It paid for their weddings, their deposits, their second chances. I never kept track out loud. I never reminded them. I just kept working, 10 hours a day, sometimes 12, 6 days a week. Even when my back ached, even when my hands stiffened in the morning, I told myself this was what a mother did. You build something and you give it away piece by piece. I opened my eyes and looked at the contract again. The numbers printed clearly, the signature line waiting. They thought this was about savings, about a bank account somewhere with my name on it. They thought I had been holding on to something they could divide, but the truth was simpler and heavier. There was no large account, no hidden pile of money. There was only the salon, the register that rang every day, the steady stream of small payments that added up to a life, and they had already been living on it without knowing. I reached for my phone and opened my banking app. I scrolled through the recent transactions, the ones they had never seen. Daniel's mortgage payment that I had covered 2 months ago, Kevin's credit card bill that had come through last week, small notes I had added to myself so I would not forget. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then I locked it and set the phone down. The contract felt lighter now, almost thin, like it did not hold as much power as they believed. I folded it carefully and placed it inside a drawer, not to hide it, but to give myself time, because for the first time in many years, I was not thinking about how to help them. I was thinking about what would happen if I stopped. The next morning, I opened the salon at 9 o'clock like I had done for more than 20 years. The metal gate rolled up with the same familiar sound. The bell above the door chimed softly as I stepped inside. Everything looked the same. The chairs lined up, the polished bottles arranged by color, the faint scent of lotion and acetone still hanging in the air. I turned on the lights one by one and watched the room come to life slowly. Nothing about this place had ever been impressive. It was not new, it was not modern, but it was steady, and steady had always been enough. Maria arrived a few minutes later. She smiled when she saw me, her hair tied back, her apron already on. "You are early today," she said. I nodded and placed my purse behind the counter. I did not tell her about the contract. Not yet. Instead, I picked up my tools and prepared my station. The first customer walked in at 9:15, a regular. She sat down and asked about my birthday. I smiled and said it was quiet. She nodded like she understood more than I said. The morning moved the way it always did. Hands, feet, small conversations, the soft hum of the massage chairs, the sound of the register opening and closing, each transaction small on its own. But together they built something solid, something that had never failed me. Around noon I stepped into the back room and sat down with a cup of tea. The same small table, the same worn chair. I opened my phone again and scrolled through my accounts, not just the recent payments, but everything, months, years, patterns that had become invisible because I never questioned them. Transfers labeled for Daniel, for Kevin, sometimes marked as gifts, sometimes as loans that were never repaid. I paused on one line, a payment from last winter. Daniel had called saying his business deal was delayed. Just a short gap. "Mom, I will pay you back." I never asked again. Another line. Kevin's rent when his startup had trouble. "Just temporary," he said. I stared at the numbers and for the first time I added them together, not carefully, not with a calculator, just enough to feel the weight of it. It was not one large amount. It was years of small rescues, quiet support, things that kept their lives moving forward while mine stayed in place. I locked my phone and sat there in the silence of the back room, listening to the faint sounds from the front, Maria laughing with a customer, the door opening again, life continuing, and I realized something simple. They did not come to the salon anymore. Not really. Not to sit. Not to watch. Not to understand. They had not seen this place in years. Not the way it truly was. To them it was just an asset. Something old that could be converted into something new. Something easier. They did not see the rhythm of it. The way it supported everything quietly. I stood up and walked back to the front, watching Maria work, her hands steady, her attention careful. She had been with me for 18 years, longer than my sons had stayed in any one place. She knew every corner of the shop, every regular customer, every small detail that kept it running. She looked up at me and smiled again. And in that moment I saw something I had missed before, loyalty, not because she had to stay, but because she chose to. The afternoon passed slowly, and by the time we closed, I had made a decision, not about the contract, not yet, but about something deeper. Something my sons would not expect. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and stood for a moment in the quiet. This place was never just money. It was the reason everything else existed, and for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I stopped letting it carry them. I did not mention anything to my sons the next day, or the day after that. I let the silence stretch, not as punishment, but as space for me to see clearly. Daniel texted me in the afternoon. Just checking in, Mom. Have you looked at the contract? I read the message and set the phone down without answering, not out of anger, but because for the first time I realized I did not owe an immediate response. Kevin called that evening, his voice light, almost casual. Just wanted to see how you are doing, Mom, and also to remind you about the offer. It is a good one. We should not wait too long. I listened. I said I was busy at the salon and that I would think about it. He accepted that answer quickly, too quickly. Like he was not really interested in what I was thinking, only in when I would agree. The next few days followed the same pattern, messages, short calls, gentle pressure wrapped in polite words. They never asked about the salon itself, never asked how business was, how my days felt. It was always about timing, about the deal, about moving forward. I began to notice how carefully they avoided certain questions, as if the details did not matter, only the outcome. On Thursday morning, before opening the shop, I sat in my car for a few extra minutes, watching the strip mall wake up, the donut shop turning on its lights, the laundry machines starting their steady hum. This place had never changed much, and that was part of its strength. I stepped inside and moved through my routine, but my mind stayed quiet, focused, not on what I might lose, but on what I still had control over. Around midday, I told Maria I needed to step out for an hour. She nodded without asking questions. She never asked questions when she sensed something was important. I drove to a small office building a few miles away, a place I had not visited in years. The name on the door was the same, Mr. Harris, attorney at law. He had helped me when I first signed the lease for the salon, when everything felt uncertain and fragile. The receptionist recognized me after a moment and smiled. It has been a long time, she said. I nodded and took a seat. The waiting room was quiet, the clock on the wall ticking softly. When Mr. Harris came out, he looked older, but his voice was the same, steady and clear. Linda, what can I do for you? I sat across from him and placed my hands on the desk. Just like I had done years ago, I told him everything, not in a rush, not with emotion, just the facts, the contract, the offer, the pressure. He listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and folded his hands. Do you want to sell? He asked. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. Not like this. Not for this reason. He nodded again. Then we need to make sure that no one else can make that decision for you. The words settled into the room, simple and direct. He explained what I already suspected, but had never confirmed, that as long as everything remained under my control, no one could force a sale, no matter how close they were to me. But he also pointed out something else, something I had not fully considered. If I did nothing, if I continued as before, the pressure would not stop. It would grow, become more persistent, more complicated. I listened carefully, asking only a few questions. Not about how to fight my sons, but about how to protect what I had built. When I left the office, the air outside felt different, not lighter, but clearer. I drove back to the salon and parked in the same spot, sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, and understood that this was no longer about a contract on a table. It was about a choice I had avoided for years, whether I would continue to carry them or finally step back and let them stand on their own. When I returned to the salon that afternoon, nothing looked different, but I knew something had already changed inside me. Maria glanced up from her station and gave me a small nod. She did not ask where I had gone. She simply made space for me to step back into my routine. I washed my hands, prepared my tools, and welcomed the next customer with the same calm voice I had used for years, but this time I paid closer attention, not just to the work, but to everything around me. The steady rhythm of appointments, the familiar faces, the quiet trust people placed in this small place. It was not just a business, it was a system. One that had supported more than just me. Later that evening, after we closed, I asked Maria to sit with me for a few minutes. We sat at the small table in the back room, the same place where I had reviewed numbers so many times before. I poured us both a cup of tea. She waited patiently, her hands folded in front of her. "You have been here a long time," I said. She smiled softly. "Almost 20 years, she answered. I nodded. "You know how everything works here," I continued. "Every supplier, every customer, every small detail." She nodded again. I watched her carefully, not testing her, just seeing her clearly. For the first time, not as an employee, but as someone who had stood beside me through years of work, through slow days and busy seasons, through everything that made this place what it was. I asked her a simple question. "If one day I am not here every day, can this place still run the same way?" She paused, thinking, then answered honestly, "Yes, but it would not be the same without you." I let that answer sit for a moment. Then I nodded. "That is why I am asking now, not later." She looked at me with a little more attention, sensing that this conversation meant something more. I did not explain everything. I did not mention my sons or the contract. Instead, I told her that I wanted to start planning for the future, not selling, not closing, but making sure the salon stayed stable, protected, independent. She listened carefully, asking only a few questions, practical ones about scheduling, inventory, responsibilities, the kinds of questions that showed she understood what mattered. We talked for nearly an hour, not about big decisions, but about small steps, adjustments that could be made quietly, gradually, nothing that would draw attention, nothing that would disrupt the flow. When we finished, she stood up and thanked me, not in a formal way, just a simple thank you. I watched her leave and turn off the last light in the front, and I realized something that had been there all along. Loyalty does not announce itself. It shows up every day, in small ways, without asking for anything in return. That night, at home, my phone lit up again. Daniel this time, his message shorter than before. "Mom, the buyer is asking for an update. We need to move forward." I read it slowly, then set the phone down on the table. I did not feel rushed. I did not feel pressured. For the first time, I felt distance, not from them, but from the role I had been playing for so long. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood there in the quiet, thinking about everything that had been built, everything that had been given, and everything that could still be protected. The contract was still in the drawer, untouched, waiting, but now it no longer felt like something I had to respond to. It felt like something they were waiting on, and that difference changed everything. The next morning, I did something I had not done in years. I arrived at the salon before sunrise, before the donut shop opened, before the parking lot filled with the quiet routine of the day. I unlocked the door and stepped inside without turning on the lights right away. The room sat in a soft gray stillness. The chairs lined up like they were waiting, the bottles catching the first hint of light through the front window. I stood there for a moment and let the silence settle. This place had always been full of noise during the day, but in the early hours it felt different, honest, like it was showing me exactly what it was without distraction. I walked to the counter and opened the register, not because I needed to count anything, but because I wanted to see it clearly. The drawer slid open with the same quiet sound, empty except for the starting cash. Simple, practical, dependable. I closed it again and ran my hand along the edge of the counter, the wood worn smooth from years of use. Every mark had a story. Every corner had been earned. And for the first time I allowed myself to think about what it would mean if I protected this not just for myself, but from them. When Maria arrived, she paused at the door, surprised to see me already there. "You are very early today," she said. I smiled and nodded, just wanted some quiet time. She stepped inside and began her routine without another question. She always understood when silence was enough. Throughout the morning I moved slower, more deliberate, noticing things I had overlooked before, the way customers trusted us with small details, the way they returned week after week without needing reminders, the way stability had become something valuable in a world that was always rushing forward. Around mid-morning I stepped outside with my phone and called Mr. Harris again, not to ask questions this time, but to move forward. I told him I wanted to begin the process we discussed, not a sale, not a closure, but a transfer plan, something that would secure the salon in a way that could not be undone by pressure or expectation. He understood immediately, his voice steady as he explained the steps, documents, timelines, nothing complicated, just careful, intentional decisions. I listened and agreed. We set a meeting for the following week. When I ended the call, I stood there for a moment, the sun now higher, the parking lot filling with cars. Everything looked the same from the outside, but inside I knew something had shifted completely. Later that afternoon, Daniel called again, his tone slightly tighter than before. "Mom, we really need an answer. The buyer is getting impatient." I leaned against the counter and looked out at the salon, Maria working quietly, a customer laughing softly, the steady rhythm continuing without interruption. I answered calmly, "I am still thinking." "Daniel." There was a pause on the other end, longer this time. Then he said, "We cannot wait forever." I nodded even though he could not see me. "I know," I replied, and that was all. When the call ended, I placed the phone face down and returned to my work. I did not feel rushed. I did not feel uncertain. For years I had moved quickly to solve their problems, to fill their gaps before they became visible, but now I was moving at my own pace, one decision at a time, each one grounded in something real, not in urgency, not in fear. And as the day came to an end and I turned off the lights once again, I understood that this was no longer about whether I would say yes or no to them. It was about building something they could no longer reach. 2 days later, I invited my sons to the salon, not for a meeting, not for a discussion, just to stop by after closing. Daniel asked why there instead of my house. I told him it was easier, closer to everything. He did not question it. They arrived a little after 6 in the evening, both dressed like they had just come from work, confident, impatient. Kevin looked around the salon like he was seeing it for the first time in years. Nothing had changed. The same chairs, the same worn counter, the same quiet hum that never really left. Daniel got straight to the point. "Mom, we really need to finalize this. The buyer is ready. We cannot keep delaying." I nodded and walked behind the counter, not to avoid them, but because that was where I had always stood when things mattered. I opened a small folder I had prepared earlier that day. Not a contract, not a refusal, just a collection of papers, statements, records. Simple things that had never been hidden but never shown. I placed them on the counter one by one. Daniel frowned slightly. "What is this?" he asked. I did not answer immediately. I let the papers sit there between us. Numbers, dates, names. Kevin stepped closer and picked up the first page. His expression changed slowly as he read. It was not complicated, just a list of transfers, tuition payments, mortgage assistance, credit card balances, all tied back to one source, this place. I watched them both as the understanding began to form, not all at once, but in pieces, like something they had never needed to think about before. Daniel looked up, his voice quieter now. "Mom, what is this supposed to mean?" I rested my hands lightly on the counter. "It means the salon you want to sell has been paying for more than you realize," I said. Kevin flipped through more pages, faster now, his movements less controlled. "This cannot be right," he said. I nodded gently. "It is right." I kept my tone even, not accusing, not emotional, just clear. "Every time you needed help, every time something did not work out, this Place filled the gap. I did not say it to embarrass them. I said it because it was true. Daniel exhaled slowly and leaned back, processing, his confidence no longer as steady. You never told us, he said. I looked at him for a moment, then answered quietly. You never asked. The room grew still after that. The salon felt different in the silence, not tense, just honest. Kevin placed the papers back on the counter, his eyes moving around the room, as if trying to see it differently now, this small place that had always been in the background of their lives, suddenly standing in the center. Daniel cleared his throat and tried to regain control of the conversation. That does not change the fact that selling is the best option, he said, his voice firmer again. We can get a good price. We can reinvest. Make something bigger. I listened, then nodded slightly. You are right about one thing, I said. This place has value, more than you think. I paused for a moment, then continued. That is exactly why I am not selling it. The words landed simply, without force, but they did not need force. Kevin looked at me, confused. You mean not now? He asked. I shook my head. No, I mean not at all. Daniel stepped forward, his frustration starting to show. Mom, you are not being practical. This is a smart move. We are trying to help you. I met his eyes calmly. I know you believe that, I said, but this is my decision, not yours. The difference between us settled clearly in that moment, not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. For the first time they were not speaking for me, and I was not stepping aside for them. I gathered the papers slowly and placed them back into the folder. The conversation was no longer about convincing anyone. It was about understanding something they had never seen before, and as they stood there, uncertain, I realized that this was the first time they were truly looking at the foundation they had been standing on all along. Daniel was the first to break the silence, his voice lower now, but sharper. You are making this more complicated than it needs to be, Mom. We are talking about a smart financial move, not your entire life. Kevin nodded beside him, still holding one of the pages, his fingers tapping lightly against the paper like he was trying to steady his thoughts. I watched them both without interrupting. They were trying to pull the conversation back to numbers, to strategy, to something they could control. But the room had already shifted away from that. This was no longer about what made sense on paper. It was about what had always been there, quietly supporting everything. You think I am not being practical, I said slowly, but for 30 years this place has been the most practical thing in our lives. It paid when nothing else did. It stayed when everything else changed. Daniel exhaled and ran a hand through his hair, his patience thinning. We are not denying that, Mom. We are just saying it is time to move on. You deserve something easier, something better. I nodded slightly, acknowledging his words. Easier for who? I asked, not sharply, just clearly. The question lingered between us. Kevin looked away first, his eyes drifting toward the front window, the reflection of the empty parking lot staring back at him. Daniel did not answer right away, and that silence said more than anything else. I stepped out from behind the counter and walked slowly across the salon, letting my hand rest briefly on the back of one of the chairs. This place is not holding me back, I said. It is holding everything together. I turned back to face them, and for a moment I saw something different in their expressions, not just frustration, but uncertainty, like they were realizing there was a part of the story they had never understood. Daniel tried again, softer this time. We thought you would want to slow down, enjoy things, not work every day. I smiled faintly. Not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. I have been enjoying my life, I said, just not in the way you expected. Kevin set the paper down and leaned against the counter, his voice quieter now. What are you going to do then? Keep working forever? I shook my head gently. No, I am going to choose what happens next. The difference was small in words, but large in meaning. I walked back behind the counter and picked up the folder again, closing it carefully. I am not selling the salon, I repeated, but I am making changes, ones that do not depend on anyone else's plan. Daniel looked at me closely now, trying to understand what I meant. What kind of changes? He asked. I met his eyes steadily, the kind that protect what I built and make sure it continues without pressure, without assumptions. Kevin frowned slightly, still trying to follow. You mean like hiring more people, expanding? I shook my head again. Not expanding. Stabilizing. The words felt simple, but they carried everything I had decided over the past few days. I did not explain the details, not yet, because this was not something they needed to manage. This was something they needed to accept. Daniel stepped back, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little, not because he agreed, but because he realized the conversation had reached a point he could not push past. "All right," he said after a moment, "we hear you, but this is not over. We will talk." Again, I nodded, calm as ever. "You can always talk," I said, "but the decision will stay the same." Kevin picked up his keys slowly, glancing once more around the salon, this time not with dismissal, but with a kind of quiet recognition. Like he was finally seeing it as something real, not just a number on a page. They walked toward the door together, and for the first time in a long while, they left without asking for anything. I stood behind the counter and listened as the door closed, the bell chiming softly, and in that small sound, I felt something settle into place. Not victory, not relief, just clarity, the kind that comes when you finally understand where you stand and where you will not move from. The next week moved quietly, not because nothing was happening, but because everything was being put into place without noise. I met with Mr. Harris again on Tuesday morning, the same office, the same steady voice, but this time there were papers prepared. Not like the contract my sons had brought. These were different, structured, careful, built to protect rather than take. We reviewed each page slowly. Ownership, management rights, operational control. I listened and signed where it mattered, not out of urgency, but with clarity. When I left his office, I did not feel lighter. I felt settled, like something that had been uncertain for years had finally found its shape. Back at the salon, nothing looked different. Maria greeted me the same way. Customers came and went, the register opened and closed, but underneath it all there was a new layer of certainty, not visible, not announced, just present. I began showing Maria more of the back end, not everything at once, just enough. Schedules, supplier contacts, how to handle certain situations. She learned quickly, not because it was new to her, but because she had been watching for years. She already understood the rhythm. Now she understood the structure. I did not tell her everything about the changes, not yet, but she sensed the shift, and she stepped into it naturally, without hesitation. Daniel called again later that week, his tone different this time, less confident, more measured. "Mom, we have been thinking, maybe we pushed too hard. Maybe we can find another way." I listened without interrupting. He continued, "Maybe we do not need to sell right now. Maybe we can just plan for later." I could hear the adjustment in his voice, not agreement, but recognition that the direction had changed. I nodded even though he could not see me. "I have already made my plans," I said, my voice calm, not distant, just steady. There was a pause, longer than before. Then he asked, "What does that mean for us?" The question was simple, but it carried everything underneath it. I answered just as simply, "It means you will need to build your own plans now." I did not say it harshly. I did not need to. The truth was clear enough on its own. Kevin did not call that day, or the next, but I saw his name on my phone once, a missed call. I did not return it immediately, not out of resentment, but because I was no longer moving at their pace. The days continued. The salon stayed open, steady as always, but now it was no longer carrying more than it should. I adjusted things quietly, accounts, access, small details that ensured everything stayed within the boundaries I had set. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would draw attention, just careful decisions made at the right time. One evening, after closing, I stood alone in the salon again. The lights dimmed, the chairs empty. I walked slowly from one end to the other, letting my hand rest briefly on each station. This place had given me everything I needed, not just money, but stability, purpose, independence, and for years I had allowed it to stretch beyond its purpose, to carry others who had stopped carrying themselves. I stopped near the front door and looked back at the room. Nothing about it had changed, but everything about how I stood within it had. I was no longer holding things together for everyone else. I was simply holding what was mine. The bell above the door was still, the night outside quiet, And in that stillness, I understood something that had taken me years to see. Strength is not in how much you give. It is in knowing when to stop giving what is no longer respected. I turned off the last light, locked the door, and walked to my car, not as someone leaving something behind, but as someone who had finally chosen what to keep.